When a student steps on the campus of a university, the history of that university becomes their history. In 1941, the University of Kansas City got its first artist in residence, Luis Quintanilla of Spain. Luis Quintanilla was a refugee from the Spanish Civil War. In the mid-1930s, General Francisco Franco had a hostile takeover of the Spanish government. Now, Luis fought on the side of the Spanish government, and he distinguished himself in hand-to-hand fighting, especially during the Battle for Madrid. He became a great folk hero in Spain, because here he was, an artist who put down his paintbrush and picked up a gun in the defense of his country. As the war went on, it became more and more clear that Franco was going to win, and his fascist takeover of Spain would become complete. And so the Spanish government sent Luis Quintanilla to the United States for safety. He first came to New York City, where he met his wife, a woman from Connecticut, and they had a small child. He worked for the World's Fair in 1939 in New York City. Later, he went to Hollywood and worked on a movie project. And there he met a Kansas City artist named Thomas Hart Benton, and the two had a lot in common. They both were primarily muralists. Well, Thomas Hart Benton happened to be best friends with University of Kansas City president Clarence Decker. So he helped arrange for Luis to come to the University of Kansas City to become its artist in residence. And it was agreed that he would teach art and he would leave behind murals on the second floor of the Liberal Arts Building. As the story goes, when he arrived at the university, President Decker brought him up into this space. The walls were all blank, and Quintanilla looked around and said, "What do you want me to paint?" And President Decker thought for a moment and said, "How about Don Quixote and the modern world?" Now, if you know anything about the story of Don Quixote was a Spanish aristocrat who was delusional. He believed he was a knight out of legend, like Lancelot. And he thought, since I'm a legendary knight, I should go on adventures and crusades. And so he went to his neighbor, a simple farmer named Sancho Panza, and said, "I want you to be my squire." And Sancho Panza said, "You're nuts." And he said, "If you become my squire, there will be an opportunity for you to become a president of a small island." And Sancho Panza said, "Well, count me in then." And the two go on madcap adventures around Spain. And so what we have here in these murals is a modern take of Don Quixote, set in 1940s America. When Quintanilla was creating the murals, he used to look out the window and look for the perfect person for the scene he was envisioning. And he would stare out the window. When that person walked by or in or out of the building, he would run down and grab them, he'd bring them up here, and he would sketch them. Cast in the role as Don Quixote was Alexander Capon, who was the professor of English here at the university. Cast in the role of Sancho Panza was Karl Kurtz, who was the university's head of facilities and a master plasterer. Karl helped plaster the walls in preparation for the frescoes, and so he was rewarded by being painted into them. In this panel here, we have Don Quixote riding his famous horse, Rocinante. As the story goes, Mr. Quintanilla was on a Sunday drive with President and Mrs. Decker. And as they were driving through a rural area, he said, "Stop the car, stop the car." And so President Decker stopped the car, and Quintanilla jumped out with his sketchbook and ran into a field where there was an old, raggedy, gray mule. And he sketched the mule and ran back to the car all excited. And they asked, "Well, what are you doing?" And he says, "I just found Don Quixote's horse." In this panel, we have Don Quixote's sidekick, Sancho Panza, modeled by Karl Kurtz. This is the ideal world of Sancho Panza that's depicted here. And so we have a simple farmer surrounded by all the good things in life. He has an abundant harvest, beautiful women, a fine cigar, everything a simple farmer could ever want. This panel represents the real world of Sancho Panza. And here we have him as president of that small island. Now, Karl Kurtz did not like the way he was depicted in the first panel. He said, "I look all fat and pudgy." Well, he obviously had no appreciation for the Cubist style that Quintanilla used. So he refused to sit for the final panel. And so Quintanilla painted Sancho Panza with his back to the audience. And here you can see him. He's in his kingly garb. He's president of the small island. He's so happy. But look at how his subjects think of him. They're laughing at him, they're jeering at him, and they're getting ready to hang him in effigy. In this panel, we have Professor of English Alexander Capon as Don Quixote cast in the guise of a modern American businessman. And this is the ideal world of Don Quixote. This is the world that he wants. Here he is, he's surrounded by beautiful women and royalty and the clergy. And then up here in the top left, the man with the mortarboard on his hat, that's University of Kansas City President Clarence Decker. Now, as the story goes, Clarence Decker and Quintanilla quarreled towards the end of this process. Clarence Decker said something to the effect that these murals were compensation for all that the university had done for Quintanilla. And Quintanilla believed that these murals were his gift to the university. It might seem like a small distinction, but the two had a quarrel over it. And I suspect that the parrot on top of President Decker's head has something to do with that quarrel. If you look up on the top right of the mural, you'll see Quintanilla himself, his wife, and his little baby son. He is wearing the traditional Spanish farmer's hat, the sombrero, which links him firmly with Spain. If you notice his American-born son, however, he's wearing a fedora, just like Don Quixote is, which links him firmly with America. This panel here sums up the whole story of the murals. It's the real world of Don Quixote. And here we have Don Quixote, the American businessman, sitting in the middle. He's confident, doesn't have a care in the world. He's delusional. Up on the right, the three girls that are kind of passively looking on at the scene, those are the three Graces. The Three Graces was a famous statue here at the university representing the three Graces of Greek mythology. They used to sit on the quad in front of today what is Mannheim Hall. And so these three girls representing the Graces put this scene here on this campus. And Don Quixote stands proud in the center of the frame with his horse, and he's totally oblivious to what's going on. Here we have a monster getting ready to pour a bucket of water on him, as if he's going to wake him up. But wake him up to what? Well, if we look down on the bottom right of the mural, we'll see what. There's a giant monster mouth. And what's inside that monster's mouth? We have fascist brown shirts goose-stepping. We have men being executed by firing squad and being hung, and men being beaten. We have General Francisco Franco sitting on a pile of skulls. What's inside this monster mouth, this mouth that's getting ready to swallow this whole scene, is the horrors of fascism. And that is what our American businessman, Don Quixote, is ignorant of. Quintanilla dedicated these murals to his longtime friend, Julian Zugazagotia. Julian had been the interior minister of Spain during the Spanish Civil War. But when Franco's takeover was complete, Julian escaped to Paris. When Paris fell to the Nazis, he was captured and sent back to Spain, where he was immediately executed. His family, however, survived and made it to Mexico City. There, eventually, Julian's grandson, also named Julian Zugazagotia, was born. And Julian became interested in art and studied at some of the great art schools in the world. And today, Julian Zugazagotia is director of the Nelson Atkins Art Museum.